Welcome to the Renegade Nutrition Podcast, where we discuss all things wellness.
I'm Eleni Welch, nutritionist.
And I'm Kay Boyer, health enthusiast. Welcome back, Renegades.
Welcome, Renegades.
Welcome. We're having a second-time guest, but a first-time Kay gets to talk to the guest one. Here we have Dr. Jeff Crippen on today, and I'll let Eleni introduce him, but I am so excited to meet him. They did a podcast without me, and I listened to it, and I have questions for you, Jeff. I am just in awe of who you are in your practice, and like the man you've became through your journey is really neat. So I'll let Eleni introduce today, and then I want to pick your brain.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the podcast, Dr. Jeff Crippen. Welcome back, I should say. Yes. And for those of you who haven't caught Dr. Jeff's first episode with us, it was the placebo effect episode, which has been a crowd favorite. So I've had multiple people message me and say that episode with Dr. Jeff on the placebo effect was so cool.
Yeah,
so,
my aunt at Thanksgiving told me that.
Did she? See,
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yes, welcome back to the podcast. And today what we're going to talk about with you, Dr. Jeff, is a whole lot of mindset, right? The placebo effect was the beginning of the mindset. And today we're going to get into winning, setting goals, crushing those goals, and then how to basically not self-sabotage yourself once you start crushing those goals, as well as the power of gratitude and presence. So this is a conversation I've been wanting to have for a long time, and I'm so excited to be having it with you. Welcome to the Renegade Nutrition Podcast, Dr. Jeff.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for having me back. Okay,
bet.
great to meet you and get to see you in person, and you get to have the whole gang for this one, which would be great.
I love it.
Absolutely.
I love it. And what we're going to talk about today is also one of my favorite things. So I won't take a long time with this, but I noticed during your podcast that you guys covered the placebo effect very well. And it was so good. I've been thinking about the negative placebo concept. It's wild. It's affected my life in a very good way. But I guess I was wanting more from the podcast. I was like, oh my gosh, what was the day-to-day things that Dr. Jeff did to help heal himself? And I do think you did touch on it a little bit, but I guess I just wanted a little bit more if you want to do that shortly.
Yeah, maybe if you introduce yourself and just for our listeners who are meeting you for the first time, where you are, where you're from, and then your story of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. And we'll hit on some of those pieces as we go through there. So my name's Jeff Crippen. I'm a chiropractor, naturopath. And through that, the way I got into health was having really bad headaches as a child. And the way that started is, a little headache that became a little more frequent, became a little more frequent. And as time went on, kind of went to a pediatrician, then you go to another pediatrician, then a neurologist and a neurosurgeon, then they found a cyst in my brain, arachnoid cyst, kind of congenital. It's in my occipital lobe or the back of my brain. Basically talked about doing brain surgery to take it out. They decided not to do brain surgery, which I'm thankful for. But at 8 years old, when they said, we're not going to do brain surgery, I felt sad, disappointed, because you're kind of hopeful, like, oh, they finally found what's going on. Like, that optimism of like, the doctor says they found the problem. And then they said, that's not the problem. And then you're like, I was crushed. So kind of, I went through that emotions, and through that journey, I went through traditional medicine for 10 years, trying the kind of allopathic approach of drugs and surgery, and found that wasn't helpful. So through that, I started trying a whole bunch of other things, and we talked a little bit about that last time. But what really turned it around to go in a little more depth on that was partnering chiropractic with nutrition and really rebuilding my body from the ground up, kind of looking at a functional approach to the body, a holistic approach. So first thing I did, this is 1999, was cut out sugar and dairy from my diet.
Wow.
Which at 13 years old, my question back to the doctor was, if I don't eat sugar and I don't eat dairy, what's left?
Right, that's all there is.
That's kind of where I was starting, just to give an idea of where it was. And then my next question was, so are eggs dairy?
Yeah.
And he goes, no, they just happen to be near each other in the grocery store. I said, okay. So that was the level I was starting from at that point. And that's, I think, a really good place for most people to start. Pasteurized dairy, refined sugar, certainly. To that now, there's a couple other ones you could add, but that's where I started. And then rebuilding the body from the ground up. And how I started rebuilding my body was um, through dietary changes and through kind of whole food supplementations that had things like liver powder and whole food vitamin C, different than ascorbic acid, but might have might have foods like adrenal gland, or might have foods like buckwheat or pea vine juice, like foods that are rich in vitamin C or foods that are rich in vitamin E instead of synthetic vitamin C or vitamin E made in a lab,
Mm-hmm.
which, vitamin C is ascorbic acid. About most of it comes from genetically modified corn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the raw substrate of where that turns into. That's very different than having a food source of it. So it was through that rebuilding process. And then as I went to college and looked at what I wanted to do, went through looking at 11 different majors. And through that, I decided, well, this person really helped me with my health. And it'd be a really cool gift to be able to give that to other people. So that led me to get into chiropractic and get into nutrition and basically try to learn more about what helped me on that journey. So that was the beginning of that. Then about 8 years into, about 5, 6 years later, I realized there's more that's holding back someone from their health. More that's holding someone back from living their best life than just their health.
Mm.
And that's when I started to get interested in these ideas like presence, mindset,
Yes.
effective communication. What is the effect of a shock on the body? Right? We touched a little bit on that last episode. So I graduated chiropractic school in 2011. So I've been practicing, a little over 12, 13 years. And around the same time, I started working at a place called the Advanced Coaching and Leadership Training Center. So basically, we working to train coaches and working on mindset coaching. Basically, because what I found is, selfishly, I like getting better and I like my life getting better. But what I also found was when I was having those bad days where things weren't going right for me, or I was feeling tough or beat up or sad, I would see that in my patients.
Mm.
The patients would be more likely to show up late, cancel their appointments, be getting sick, not feeling well, kind of not as happy and cheerful in there. And consequently, the more I was kind of in the zone, things were working, just a nice flow to it. I was a better doctor to the patients, and I would see that reflected in their overall health as well. So that kind of gets us into the beginning of the kind of the woo-woo or the spiritual area of health. But I think there's a lot of good science into it, which we can get into. But that was kind of some of those eye-opening moments for me. It's the more I investigated that area, I became a better doctor, but I think that was also having a positive effect on my patients as well. So that's what led me to combine those two areas. So
Wow.
combine the mindset coaching presence with the nutrition and chiropractic.
So cool.
Wow. Well, I definitely love the invisible stuff and the
Yeah.
mindset and the meaning and the beliefs that we all run off of. So I'm way excited for this one. Golly.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll sort of set you free if you feel good about that, Dr. Jeff, to talk about this topic of presence, gratitude, the power of those things, and then how to basically set goals, crush those goals, and then what comes along when we start having success in our goals. What are the goods and the bads that can come along with that?
Perfect. So maybe I'll start with one part that dovetails what we were just talking, and then we'll bounce it around and kind of see where we go. But
That's it.
um, we've heard the saying, or it's a common saying, birds of a feather flock together, or you may hear you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? And it's important that we have friends that we can build healthy habits with if we're focused in on health, right?
Yeah.
They're more likely to take us to the gym. They're more likely to eat healthy. We're more likely to go for a walk or run or go to yoga or lift or whatever we're doing with them. Um, so that's kind of the beginning of, it's kind of a connected universe. It's a telepathic universe. We kind of connect the people on more than just a physical level. Well, there was some interesting science done around this idea. It's by two brothers. Last name is Christakis. but they were actually at Harvard. And I think I might have mentioned to this, Elaine, in the conversation we were having.
Yeah, I was going to
But
ask you to get into this, and I'm so excited you're opening with
perfect. Well,
it.
we're so connected that that's apparently where I wanted to
Yes.
start. So, but I think it dovetails nicely. So, what they found is pretty simply, if you guys are friends, Kay, and you start eating better, well, your friends are more likely to eat better, which is great. But also, what they found is your friends' friends are more likely to eat better, which we could maybe see a connection, right? Maybe
Yeah.
through them. But it goes even three levels out. So your friends are more likely to start eating better just because you started eating better. And that's true whether you're eating better or eating worse. That's true whether you start exercising or whether you stop exercising. That's true whether you decide to vote, decide not to vote, start smoking or quit smoking, right? You can see these levels, you can see these effects three levels away, which is wild
Hmm.
because how many of your friends do you know? And then how many of your friends do you know? The answer is that number gets pretty small pretty quickly. So I think that's kind of an entry point or where we'll get into that is, it is very much a connected or kind of telepathic universe. So the changes we're making, they're happening on multiple levels beyond just the physical.
That's so interesting because I used to do yoga all the time. I just got tired. I quit it. And then
Uh-huh.
we had a yoga lady on here the other day. She did yoga. And then I was all of a sudden, we're around
Uh-huh.
her. She's doing yoga. So then I'm like, well, I'm going to do yoga. I started doing yoga again. And then my friend was like, you know what? I'm going to start doing. It's so true how it's like, wait, why did something click in my brain where all of a sudden I'm like, I'm going to go back to yoga? Like, why did that happen? But the people around you, they really do affect us. It's interesting.
Yeah, and we could really get into that. It's a really fascinating thing. And there was a gentleman named McClare. He was a biophysicist at Oxford, and what he said is um, that the body's up to 100 times more sensitive to electromagnetic stimuli than it is to physical stimuli. So this is like you walk into a room
Mm-hmm.
and you get a sinking feeling in your stomach because you see that one person across the room that you don't want to talk to, or you
Mm-hmm.
walk in and see a great friend and you just feel like filled with love and ready to start your day. We're 100 times more sensitive to that than we are to eating a food like that makes us feel more energized or
if
less
if they
energized.
could like quantify that in a way where we all see it, wouldn't that like freak everyone out? Like if I like walk into a room and have this reaction to one person but not the other, and then it's like all my secrets are out, like this is
And you're going to know
wild.
which people really like you and which
Yeah,
ones are
yeah,
likes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like the
Well,
invisible world really does like determine our life, and we just go about it in this physical way. It's wild.
yeah, and it goes all the way back to like we talk about like the physical, like one quote I like comes all the way back from Plato, and he says one of the mistakes he said the biggest mistake people make is they have doctors for the physical and doctors for the spiritual without realizing that the two are the same. I might be
Mm.
slightly messing up the quote, but
Mm-hmm.
the idea is that we have that duality, that Cartesian duality, I think is what it is, but just separating of mind and body, or spirit, mind, and body, instead of realizing that's all one piece. And um, in the book, I tell the story about having to make a model of an atom in fifth grade. So you have, not to give too many people PTSD or flashbacks to like chemistry or physics, but like physics in this case. But you have a nucleus of the atom with the protons and the neutrons, and then you have little electrons, right? They were little circles around there, right? And that's kind of the basis of it. So at one point in fifth grade, we had to make a model of that, and I glued a bunch of nickels and pennies to a mini basketball, right? And that's how I made the nucleus, and then bent some coat hangers and put some dimes on it, and that was basically the model of the atom. But what we realize is what I realize now, or what quantum physics tells us, is that model of the atom is totally incorrect, in the sense that if the nucleus of an atom was the size of a mini basketball, the closest electron would be over a mile away. So what it
Crazy.
means is the atom, yeah,
Crazy.
the atom is 99 point, I think 9996% empty space. Only, of course, it's not empty. It's actually full of energy. So when we think of, the physical universe and what it's made out of and what it's built of, we see bricks. we see road, we see sidewalks, we see chairs, right? It's stuff that seems quite solid, but the reality behind it is it's actually energetic, 99.9996% energy that makes it up. So it's really
Whoa.
much more of an energetic universe that affects us more than even the physical.
So Kay and I are actually touching right now.
Yeah, we are.
That's what I'm gathering.
Yes. Okay. Well, these kind of talks hurt my brain a little bit when I think about it. Because it's like, okay, our reality is, mostly energetics. I hear that. But we still sit on the chair and it holds us up.
Yep.
So then I'm a little bit like, what?
Sure.
Then I guess what does that mean for us then if it's mostly energy? As far as feelings go, I can totally take that in. Like the feelings of energy and things like that makes sense to me. But like the rest of the like physics and the quantum, I'm like, my brain is about to explode.
Yeah, good. So let's make this super practical.
Yeah.
So when we go into a doctor, they often weigh us. They may check our blood pressure, right? They may check cholesterol. That's a whole nother story, but that's often like the basic foundation of what they do. Mm-hmm. And what we know is if you normalize someone's blood pressure, it'll add like about 1 to 3 years to their life. If they're at a healthy weight, they'll live about 1 to 3 years longer, right? If you don't smoke, it'll add maybe 2 to 4 years to someone's life. So those are some small physical changes that we have a very tangible effect on someone's life. Well, you can look at research and there's an effect that can add somewhere between 7 and 15 years to someone's life. So I think we'd all like to know what that one is, right? And that's basically what they've seen with that is the mood level, right? So somebody's more optimistic. Optimists, some of the studies I was looking at live somewhere between 7 and 15 years longer than people that are pessimistic.
Wow.
Which means that's roughly, 3 to 15 times more powerful than blood pressure.
Wow.
Right? Or than weight. And that's kind of the science, but I think we all kind of know this. Like, does everyone have that one aunt that like smoked and drank a lot of alcohol but still lived to 92?
Yeah.
And you don't understand.
Yes, yeah.
Or like bacon grease every morning and they had a pint of whiskey and they live for a really long time. We all have this, and the flip side is we know people who eat really well and take care of themselves and do yoga and eat a lot of vegetables, and you go through a lot of things that we think are quite healthy, but still continuously struggle with their health. And if we look at it from a purely physical standpoint, you can't quite really make sense of it, right?
Yeah,
we can't make sense how somebody who smokes and drinks a lot of alcohol is healthier than someone who eats a lot of nutrient-dense vegetables and high quality protein, things like that. But if we expand our understanding outside of the physical, then some of those pieces can make a little bit more sense.
Yes. Okay. One thing that clicked in my brain when you were saying this is I heard of this study, and you guys are good at quoting your sources, and I'm not, and I'm an idea person, but there's a study about a person who they had multiple personalities, and in one personality their blood pressure is one way, and in another of their personalities their like all of their bio whatever feedback is different. And that's really what opened my mind to what we're talking about today. I was like, how could that be if it's the same physical body, their personality change? That is wild.
There's been some real interesting, so they used to be called multiple personality disorders. It's now called dissociative identity disorder, but it's the same phenomena of what you're talking about. And I remember, and I say that just because I remember looking at some and they changed the names, but it's the same phenomena. And some of it was fascinating. I mean, there's some where people's eye color changed as they went between one personality of another. And we think, what could be, And there's another one that really got me. When one personality, the person was an insulin-dependent diabetic. Type 1, autoimmune, can't make insulin. And in another one, it was totally normal.
What?
See, like, make sense of that to us. Make sense.
I don't know if you can.
What?
So I've thought a lot. I thought a lot about it. So, and I was talking to. So then I'll give you a couple more interesting stories, and then we'll talk about maybe how to make sense of it.
What?
So there was one of the craziest stories was. There was someone who got a heart transplant, and it was an elderly lady. And then all of a sudden she started to get cravings for fried chicken and beer. And it was just like something in her personality is kind of changing, and like the children were kind of getting like what's gotten into grandma kind of thing. And they actually traced back who her heart transplant came from. And it was a biker dude who loved to drink and loved to eat fried chicken. Right. And that was kind of, yeah.
What? How is like
And the,
wild memory
yeah,
in the heart? What?
exactly. Yeah. Or outside it. And the craziest
Yeah.
one was this was written up in the New York Times is it was a sick, I think it was a young girl. I want to say she was around 6 years old, and it was this unsolved murder for over a couple years. But anyway, once the girl was killed, the heart ended up in someone else. And then the person who had the new heart kept getting this reoccurring, horrible, violent nightmare. And it was so bad, they brought in a psychologist. Eventually, they brought in an FBI sketch artist, went through the whole nightmare with the person, and actually solved an unsolved murder of where it came from.
Stop. I have
Years
goosebumps.
Goosebumps too. Look, the energy's affecting us.
Yeah.
What the what?
So the question is, how do we make sense of any of this?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is we have to look outside the physical. So what does that mean specifically? I the way I make sense of it is that I think our body is a transceiver, so it can transmit things and it can receive things, right? We can feel tapped into something, we can feel connected. Sometimes sisters will have this or twins will have it. You'll have like the ESP moment, or you'll think of your best friend or your spouse and they'll text you right at that moment. Like we can sometimes be tapped in on that. But what I think we can do as kind of what the spirit or life force does outside the body is it's the station we're tapping into.
Wow.
And I think what happens with that heart is it was still tapped in to that, not that physical body, but it was still connected to that other kind of the spiritual essence of that other being.
Wow.
And you're still, it's like, just think of your TV. You can change the channel on your TV, or you can change the channel on your radio, and the radio doesn't change, but the sound coming out is very different. And you go from one station to another. You can go from sports to an action movie to the news, and it'll change really quickly. Same physical television, but just difference is what we're tapping into. And I think that's some of what explains. So that's how I make sense of that phenomenon is what are we perceiving? What are we tapping into? And depending on what that answer is, depends on the effect it has on the body and what we see kind of manifest in the physical.
Wow.
The radio was the exact example I was thinking of as we were talking about that was like, it's like a radio where it's a physical box that the frequency is like being brought into, but it's not like, it's not attached in any way that we can see. We can't see how it brings in those frequencies. It's just the physical box.
Another thing that breaks my brain.
Yeah.
Yep. And that kind of reminds me of the quote from Albert Einstein. I'm going to do my best with it, but whether you're happy or not depends on if you see the universe as good or bad. There's an idea to that. But like you talking about like that source, like we're both believers, Eleni and I. And so I do have this sense of like, there's a bigger power here. Like I can't explain a lot, but I do have a sense that it is good because I do think that like good beats bad. I believe love beats hate, like that sort of thing. And so we can get hints of what this bigger energy thing, God thing, whatever you want to call it is. And there's some, hints at its characteristics. But I think that like what I'm hearing here, it's like tapping into that source and like for me to be happy, I do believe it's a good source. You know what I mean? Yeah. And the life force of everything. But even though life holds some cruelty, but I think that's also like for growth, which would, I guess, be my mindset.
And free will.
Right. So anyway, kind of talk on some of that if you don't mind, if that kind of hits a chord for you.
Sure. Yeah, I think we can go a ton of different ways with that. But what I think is if we see God as this non-material, physical, benevolent being that's connected to each of us, right? One of the other a line from the Bible that jumps out to my mind is the kingdom of God is within you. So, right, whatever you've seen me do, whether you've seen the Father do, you can do as well. So those same characteristics, I think, are here in us. And it's easy to sometimes separate those two instead of seeing or recognizing a little bit of the divine within each of us. Right. So some of those same qualities there.
Yes.
when you look at so one thing I looked at was as I was getting curious about the non-physical, I looked at things like meditation and prayer and being part of a spiritual community and looking for what sort of effects they have. So I'll just read this piece right here. Spiritual community members live longer with a 20 to 55% lower rate of death, depending on the study. They also had lower rates of heart disease, high blood pressure, less complications from diabetes, and amazingly, we're about 90% less likely to get meningitis, according to one study, which means being part of a spiritual community was slightly more effective than getting the meningitis vaccine. So that's good news there.
Yeah. Very specific. I love that.
Yeah. And then you can see that on prayer, right? Decreased levels of pain, improved recovery from surgery, slower progression of Alzheimer's disease, improved quality of life, less negative emotions, more calmness, peace, encouragement, social support. So it's a non-physical thing, but it's very real. But the reason it seems weird is because I think often, in our world, in our culture, but especially in the medical paradigm, there's kind of this idea that if it's not matter, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or the non-physical isn't important, right? It's very much, if it shows up on blood work, you can point to it. If it shows up on an x-ray, it's real, right? Yeah. Or if a doctor gives it a Latin name, right? Blah, 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 itis, right? Yeah. Or whatever we make up and turn into Greek, it seems very real because we very much prioritize the physical over the non-physical. But I think, the message, or I think one of the ideas is, that's all great and real, and foods help. Herbs help. Good quality nutrition is important. Clean water matters, right? We can go through all that stuff. It doesn't negate any of that. I think this is a yes and opportunity to say, if we do that and we're open to meditation or prayer or understanding more about the spiritual or the placebo, as we talked about last time, then I think we can maximize or amplify those effects even more.
Absolutely. Well, take us into gratitude. This is one of my favorite topics. And I have gotten out of gratitude journaling. I did it every single day for a year, just about.
Yeah.
I journaled every day. And then I think I just was going back through my gratitude journal. This was a little interesting sidebar. I was going back through my gratitude journal. And I had stopped gratitude journaling when I was 27 weeks pregnant. I think because I would always do it when I was in the sauna in the morning. And when I was pregnant, I would just set the sauna really low. But at some point I became large enough that even like the sauna at its lowest temperature became uncomfortable and it was getting like warm. And so I just didn't have that time, and I would meditate and I would pray and I would journal. That was my time every morning. And around 27 weeks pregnant, I stopped having that time because I started going outside and going for walks. And then I would meditate as I walked around the lake that's by my house. So I didn't have my journal on me because that's, it was different. And I still had that meditation time, but it took a different shape. So I had stopped journaling. Anyway, so I want to get into gratitude because I know that made such a big difference in my life. But just as an interesting little sidebar, the last entry, I had a friend. We had some friends that were struggling with some infertility and pregnancy loss, recurrent pregnancy loss. And the very last thing I had written in my gratitude journal was, I am thankful for the miracle I know God will work in their lives. Like, I know he will give them a healthy baby. And that was, close to a year ago now. And I recently just went and opened up the journal. And that happened to be the day they told us they were pregnant with a healthy child. And that was the last entry I had. And I did not remember at all. I didn't remember writing that entry at all. Those two things coincided on like, if it wasn't the same day, it was within the same week. That it was just such a crazy, powerful thing. Anyway, so I believe in the power of gratitude, and I believe that it can manifest, like being thankful for things before they happen can also help those things manifest. Can we dive into this topic, please?
Yes.
Gratitude.
Absolutely. And that's a phenomenal story. Don't need to tell mine. We could listen to yours right there. That's a great one. But it is amazing what can happen when you're present, and what can happen with you connected. One of the best explanations I heard for how gratitude works is it taps us into the superconscious mind, or the part that's connected to all of us. So we've heard of maybe the unconscious or the subconscious, which is below our awareness. So superconscious, kind of by definition, would be what's above our awareness. Kind of, some people might call it the oneness, the universe, right? But we can tap into that. And I think gratitude is what does it. We mentioned optimists living longer than pessimists in that study. There was one other one that I think I'll mention that kind of connects into this, and it was Kelly McGonigal out at Stanford. She looked at about 30,000 people and measured their level of stress, followed them over 8 years, and looked at the rate of death. And what she found is the people who were the most stressed had the highest rate of death. So it's, pretty obvious, pretty self-explanatory, but not what was unique. What was unique is that those who had the highest rates of stress, but saw stress as a good thing, actually had lower rates of death than anyone else in the study, including the people with the lower rates of stress, or the lowest rates of stress. These people had even lower rates of death than that. So super stressed, but saw it as a good thing. So what's happening there? What are we doing? We're just changing the channel.
Yeah.
Right? We're changing what we're perception, because what doesn't change is one part. I don't know if I don't think I put it in the book. One part I had written in earlier versions was my first experience on a roller coaster, which for me was like utter destruction, like not
Terrifying.
enjoyable.
Yeah, I hate 'em.
Didn't enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah, hate 'em.
And my sister who's 18 months younger than me is on this roller coaster and just thinks it's like one of the best things in the world, and like immediately wants to go again. Right. It's the same roller coaster, right? For her, it was like exhilarating and joyful. And for me, it was like, I, just want to go hug my mom or something at the end of it when I'm like 6 years old going through it. So it's the same experience, but what changes our perception of that experience. So so I think that's a key lesson to this. So what does gratitude do? It changes the station, right? Because if we look at life, is how much of our attention is put on, hey, the world is great, it's a beautiful place, and it's where we want to be, or how much of our attention is put on, this isn't working, this isn't right, look what this person did to me, I can't believe this is going on, blah, 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 blah. And no matter how positive we are, most of us have some degree of the pull down towards the negative. And if you don't, great, I'd like to interview them. I think that should be interviewed next on your podcast. Yeah, because I can learn from them. I can learn from them as well. And that's part of the reason why I think that's part of the reason our community is important, right? Are we having people that are bringing us up or taking us down? So for me, that gratitude is like a touchstone practice of each morning. How am I starting my day, and what am I putting my attention on? What am I choosing to see in the world? Right? We have that example of like, you think about buying a Jeep and then all of a sudden you see Jeeps all over the road, and like you had no idea there were that many Jeeps in the world, or little red bugs or Corvettes or whatever your car of choice is. Right? It's that phenomenon of what we see kind of expands. So that's, I think, a lot of what that gratitude process is. It taps us into the good in the world and puts our attention on that. And the way I do that is, how I've applied it and really enjoyed is doing that in the morning and in the evening. So in the morning, first question I do is just kind of, what is my goal for the day? And this, you kind of mentioned goal setting. We'll kind of get into this here. And I think one thing I heard about goal setting that really makes a lot of sense that I've shared with my clients is, short-term goals should be really small. Like, what most people aren't accustomed to doing is winning and achieving their goals and building a positive momentum. So the ridiculous example is, my goal today is learn something, and you step out of bed, stub your toe, and go, well, I learned I shouldn't have put my foot there.
Yeah, should have stayed in bed, guys.
Exactly. There's your learning. But if you give yourself a goal you can win with each day, I think is really great. And then I think the balance of that is longer term goals should probably be bigger than you think are possible. And then short term goals should probably be smaller. So that's kind of the first thing I go is, what is a goal for the day? Second is, I'm going to remember the question right now. What am I freely willing to give others today? Time, presence, smile, love, laughter, whatever that whatever that is, your knowledge, like what am I freely willing to give others today? And then and third question is, what is 10 things that I'm grateful for? And then fourth is, what do I value that another does for me right now? So if that's not included in that first one, just kind of putting out that flow of gratitude and appreciation towards someone else. And then the final question in the morning is, what am I happy about right now? Just again, putting the attention on the positive as we kind of start each day. And then at the end of the day, it's how did I do on my goal? And I try to look for one thing I did well, right? Instead of it's intention of that is to be a positive process. So did I accomplish part or all of that goal in some way today? And then so that's question 6 at the end of the day. 7 is what did I do well, increase in value and get better at today? Because what I've seen in myself and many people, especially if they're successful, is it's so easy to go on to the next thing and then
Mm-hmm.
the next thing and then the next thing and then the next thing. And by 4 o'clock, you might not even remember what happened at 10 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Forget what happened a week ago. Forget what happened a month ago. So really taking that time to getting into and owning that win, because if we drive right past it, if we just and metaphorically drive right past it in life, then we can't really appreciate it or savor it. And if we don't really own it, then it's easy to lose, right? If we don't really realize what we did well, hey, I led a great meeting today. So how did I actually do that? What did that mean? Because if with a little bit of inspection, it's a heck of a lot easier to do the next time, right? You can
Mm-hmm.
own what you did well. And one of the things um, kind of you mentioned earlier was kind of self-worth or self-esteem. And a big
Mm.
basis of that is owning what you do well, owning the value you bring to life. So I think owning our wins or just being aware of those is incredibly valuable around that. And then the final question I ask is just if I were to be happier, what would I be happier about right now? So just again, put the attention on the positive to end the day. And that comes from the work of a gentleman named Alan Walter, and took one of his courses. But those are some questions that have really resonated with me. And it's probably been my practice for 13, 15 years, something like that. But
Wow.
yeah, I mean, I've certainly missed days over that time, but that's very much the exception versus the rule. But I can almost feel it if I haven't done it by like 10 a.m. or noon, or I'm rushed or I'm late or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like a lot of power just like plugging into the positive side of life, I guess would be a kind of how I would describe that happening.
I love that.
I love it so much. I feel like I could have used you 20 years ago. So, okay, I'm just going to talk and we'll just see what comes out here. You know, it's a surprise. But you're talking about mindset and like self-sabotaging. I know we were going to touch on that, but it's so interesting because I was raised like very, very kind of more fundamentalist Christian, where it was almost even kind of bad to think you did something good. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? So I think for any
Sure.
listener that's out there, it's like you saying that, I was like, yes, that's such a healthy way to think. But I was like, I can remember the last 20 years of my life, if I would have thought, okay, you did really good, I'd be like, well, now you're a selfish, ego-centered sinner, you know what I mean? So it's like, for me, I can really see like, oh my gosh, even the mindset of being like proud of yourself. It's like, even me saying that, I'm getting goosey bumpies. Like, can I be proud of myself? Oh my God. Okay. Yes, I can be, you know what I mean? And to tap into the God or source or whatever, is out there. It's like, that's a good thing. They're here in love. They want you to be present and be happy with what you're doing. So I appreciate your message of like involving God and involving science and involving positive self-worth. I think can all go together. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I think, and that what you're saying is common.
Yeah.
Different cultures we could have come out of, different beliefs or mindset. Down in Australia, they talk about cutting down the tall poppy, right? Of just basically that idea that whoever stands out kind of gets chopped down. And sometimes you see
Um,
that with different groups or different organizations, or I don't want to be arrogant. I don't want to be egotistical. I don't
yeah.
want to stand out, right?
Yep.
There's all kinds of different precepts or beliefs. And this isn't, a license to walk around and say, I'm the best and show up people and walk
Mm-hmm.
around with an air of superiority. But it's very much recognizing what you're saying of like owning who we are,
Mm-hmm.
owning our self-worth, like owning the value we bring to a relationship, to a company, to a practice, to a mission, And it can be, I mean, and from that, I think kind of generates like our power, right? And who we are. If we can have that, and I think in a comfortable way, I think that's a really powerful place to come from. So the question is, how do we create that? How do we generate that? And I think part of the answer is it's actually our natural state. We may not
Yes.
be there,
Yes.
but I think it's very much our natural state. But how do we recover that or re-tap into it? And I think many ways, but I think that gratitude process can be a really powerful way just to put ourselves on the positive and reconnect into that.
Yep.
Absolutely. And what about
Wild.
presence? Can we talk about this
Yeah.
concept of
Yes.
presence? I think this is such an important topic for our listeners, especially in today's age, where I'm old school, so I do not appreciate when I like go out to dinner with somebody and they have their phone on the table.
Yeah.
Even if
Yes,
they
yes.
don't look at it, like my husband and I have had this conversation, especially with having our daughter, because I feel even though she's, only almost 8 months, she's watching everything we're doing. And I'm like, it's so removed when you're in with somebody, like
Yes.
in the room, but you're on your
Yes.
phone. It is like, you might as well not even be there.
Yep.
And I really feel that. So I think that presence, being present
Yes.
where we're at, taking note of our surroundings, taking it in, listening to the conversation, actually absorbing what people are saying, or even when we're alone. I want to dive into this topic of presence because I think one of the times we're the most checked out is when we're alone, because it's scary to be with our own
Yes.
thoughts. And it's almost
Yes.
like you think of that as boring now because we're so inundated
Yes.
with like email notifications and social media notifications. And it's so easy, instead of having a moment just to sit and be present and give yourself the opportunity to ask, like, what am I feeling right now? What are my emotions doing? What am I upset about? How's my left toe feeling? Like, you know what I mean? You just
Yep.
don't check in with your mind or your body. And instead we sit down and have a moment where we could do that. And then we pick up our phone and start looking at like somebody else's life on social media
Yep.
and paying attention to their life instead of our own. Like, can we just dive into this topic of presence and why it's
I
important?
think we're already there, girl. So
Yep,
yeah, we might
it's
as well
good.
just keep going.
Yep. Wait, let me get my phone out. I got to check on something real quick.
Just give me a second. I'll get right back to you.
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
So I think for me, just personally, on a call like this or working with clients, for me, the day feels better if I've had my phone on airplane mode for a certain number of time each day. And I can't tell you exactly what it is, but just the idea that for me mentally that I can take my attention off it and just be present is like a very good thing. And this isn't to say I get distracted on a phone call or like look at text message while I'm talking to someone, because all that stuff happens for sure. So, but there is this like, there's this positive feeling to me, like, yeah, that phone was on airplane mode for whatever period of time today, and I was able to be with a client or be with someone at dinner and just kind of be present with them for sure. And I think what it comes down to is I think we have to define presence first, because presence isn't a physical ability, right? You can be right next to someone and they can be very much absent, or we could be very much absent when we're with someone, right? So presence is very much a spiritual ability, and just simply defined, just the ability to be here now, right? And if we expand that out a little better, maybe being here now and in an optimum mood level, right? And then your point is, but a lot of people aren't present. A lot of people are disconnected. And I think the answer to that is, you're right. The question is why? And I think the answer is it can be painful, right? Because when we're present, what do we run into? We run into losses, or we run into fears, or we run into some of our thoughts, or we run into that thing that happened in second grade or 2 days ago, or the person that was upset at the grocery line that yelled at us, or whatever those incidents are that we've been trying to hold off, trying to run away from, trying to not think about. And so I think, the social media or the phone or the notifications, I think that can almost be, I think it's a problem for sure, but I also think it's probably even more than that, a symptom of it, a symptom of distracted attention, a symptom of not wanting to be present. Because when we run into that stuff, it's like if you know someone after a funeral, and did they let out the good cry? Did they really feel the loss? Did they express the emotions that were sitting there? Or are they walking around with this like slightly artificial smile on their face or grit in their lip and that everything's okay? And not everyone has to cry after a funeral, right? We can each have our own reactions to it, but there's a genuineness to that emotion. Can you feel it when it comes up? So I think part of presence and the reason it's painful or difficult or easier to not be present is, are we willing to experience and feel and be honest about what comes up? Because once we can, that's actually what allows it to release.
Mm-hmm.
It's that feeling of, you talk to a great friend, you have a good cry together, and then what do? You feel better. You feel lighter. You feel more present. Right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's actually the natural end product, but we have to, it takes some bravery sometimes, and it takes some courage to go into those areas and be willing to feel that, to allow us to be there, to be more present at the inside, at the other side of it.
You're absolutely right. I just had a talk with one of my girlfriends. We were on a road trip last week, and we were talking about like our phones and social media. And I'm like, oh gosh, I'm on a little bit more lately. It's winter, and by the end of it, we were talking. We're like, we are both just living in escapism. Like we are just escaping our life right now instead of like just like buckle up, get in your life. And if I mean, my life's not so bad. I actually have a wonderful life. But if I'm trying to escape so much, why not instead dive into my life and actually grow the things inside of my actual life that I want to, instead of living in
Vicariously.
yeah, right. And I'm like a visionary, like I'm a kind of a dreamer personality, but I have this great quote that has like anchored my soul this year, and it's that a foolish woman builds her dreams in the sky, and a wise woman builds her dreams at her feet. And so that's what I've been trying to learn, that like quit with the ideas, quit with the escapism, like, and this is total distraction, and like really bring my mind into the present and make changes where I'm actually at. And that feels so simple, but like, gosh, it's like revolutionizing my life. And it's also very hard.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I wasn't, I mean, it takes bravery sometimes to confront that. It is sometimes easier to mindlessly scroll on insert social media app name here, right? Than it is to confront or just feel those emotions or touch into them, for sure, right? And some of that stuff is actually, that's the power of a good friend or a great coach or some kind of positive, you know, processor or coach or mentor in our lives to help us find those blind spots or those areas we're avoiding. Because basically, it's like we're going down the road and, we hit a little pothole. Are we going to go through the pothole and feel that uncomfortableness? Or are we going to go around it? Or are we going to turn left and end up at the beach instead of going towards our goals and towards our dreams, kind of as that's turning on? And I think that's our question. And as you were saying that about being a dreamer, I think it's important to realize, but that can be a really great quality. So don't like throw away, don't want to throw away all the dreams or have the listeners take that away. I think what
True.
you're saying is you can dream and you can be in the present.
Yeah.
But those two should connect.
Yes,
Right.
yes. And that is actually the beauty of this year. It's like I just
Yeah.
lived in separate dreams.
Sure,
But now
for
I'm
sure.
like, which is even scarier now, is to actually like, I did dream to escape, but now to actually be like, oh, what if I could make some of my dreams actually come true? And then it is the courage to do that, because I'm like, whoa, that's even scarier. Like it's fun when
Yeah,
I can just
exactly.
escape. So then it's
'Cause
like a mind thought, like, whoa, or a mind trip.
Because once you start implementing it, that's when actually the charge or the resistance turns on. Like it's, to give a example, it's one thing to ask a girl or to dream about asking a girl out on a date. It's another one to walk up and say hi, just as a real
Yeah.
simple example.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? It's one thing to think about, hey, I'm going to start a podcast. It's
Yeah.
another one to go through the financial commitment, the time commitment, right? Or start a documentary or whatever those things happen to be. But the closer we get to that goal, the more that charge or resistance turns on. One thing
Oh,
Yeah,
bringing
one
in
thing
the
I heard is,
energetics. This is good.
yeah, one thing I heard is like the hardest. I mean, I was listening to, I forget who was saying this, but they were talking about a marathon. It's, 26.2 miles. They go, what's halfway in a marathon? And they say the answer is somewhere between 20 and 22 miles because you'll feel
Mm.
as much pain the final 4 miles as you do the first 20 to 22. And
Ah.
I think that's an example, and I don't know what the point is, but that seems about right to me. I ran one and that was it. But I think that's often how life is. Like the closer we get to the finish line, the more resistance we feel about something.
Mm.
And at that point, some of the skill is to sort out, is this resistance because I'm getting close to a dream that I have to confront and work through and be more present and be more loving and increase my knowledge? Or is this resistance because, hey, I'm not doing the right thing, right? Or maybe I should actually, this isn't the right thing for me to work on. I think that's the skill to figure it out because those manifestations could be the same. Because just think of that deadline for work or that project you're working on. The closer you get to the finish line, the more problems show up at the last minute. And then, of course, as you're driving to work to turn it in, that's when you'll find the traffic light or the baby's going to be sick that day or they're going to throw up on your shirt or whatever the thing is. It's the last minute stuff that can make it really, you know, difficult. But if we can, so anyway, that's what turns on as we move towards those goals. So if we can see the goal and kind of inspect that and work through it, then I think it makes it easier to recognize that, hey, that's kind of part of the process. And the bigger the goal, the more resistance that's going to turn on around it.
Yeah, I think that that's so tangible right now in my own life, as Kay and I are working towards this documentary, which for our listeners, Dr. Jeff is going to be a part of. So if you love what you're hearing now, we're excited to share. Hopefully I'm not jumping the gun sharing that, Dr. Jeff, but we're bringing him in to be part of it too. Because if you're listening to anything we're saying, then he needs to share his wisdom with the world.
That's what I was thinking. He's like our secret weapon for all the healing.
But it's so true because, Kay and I started talking. Well, the idea for the documentary probably came to me almost close to 2 years ago. And at that time, it was like, that'd be a cool idea. And it was a little bit like you were sharing.
Yeah.
That it was almost like a dream to escape. Not like I needed to escape my life, but it was more of a daydream. Mm-hmm. And then it kept coming and coming and coming. And I thought, well, why can't I do it? There's no reason I can't make a documentary. Yeah. Why shouldn't I make a documentary? And so it started to feel a little bit more real. And then, and then I had this excuse not to do anything with it for a while because I was pregnant. We're going to be having a baby. And so it was like, that's not a good time to start. And then as just the last couple of months, as I felt the push, the draw to pick it back up, and all of these doors have just opened one after the other. I mean, as soon as that thought came to my mind, that was like, it's time to pick this project back up and it's time to carry it forward. Just door after door after door after door started opening. And I can tell you, every door that opens, it's scarier, but in such a good way. I mean, I think I love that idea of how stress impacts you is how you perceive it, because the stress I feel with this project is like, I feel that I'm stressed about it because I'm doing something that's going to help change the world. And I want to know, and I know that it's important and it needs to be done well in order to have impact. And I like that stress. Yeah. But it's different than the stress you feel when you're working on a project that doesn't resonate with your soul or with your life mission. And that kind of stress to me is when I perceive it as bad stress, because I'm spending time doing something that doesn't align with like who I am and what I'm here on earth for. But projects like this align with who I am. And so I just keep feeling, even though it's so much work, we have these looming deadlines and I feel stressed, but I don't feel negative about it. I feel excited about it. And I'm like, okay, this is good. This is good stress, because that means the work I'm doing is important. But I can say that I feel that resistance building because we're really getting close to the place where it's going to just come down to funding. All the pieces are lined up. And the closer I get, the more I feel that like, whoa, this is kind of scary now, because this is actually happening. This is really manifesting. And this is a huge responsibility. And now it's getting scarier and scarier because it's not just an idea, it's actually happening. So I can just so relate with that concept. I'm picturing it as like when you have two magnets, you know, and you're moving them
That's exactly
together
it.
and
Like
you
push.
feel the
Yep.
energy between
And
them.
the
And
closer they get together,
yeah,
They
the
push
more
harder.
force there is.
yeah. And it's crazy whether they're drawing together or pushing
Yeah.
away. You know, you feel that
Yeah.
as they get closer. That's like, that was what I was envisioning. And that's so tangible right now in my life is like, I'm drawing near this goal and the resistance in a way I feel that it's drawing me in. And I'm almost a little bit
Yeah.
like, trying to like dig in my heels.
Yes.
Like,
Yes. Now you're going to be when the magnets flip and they just pull together.
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's what it feels like, right? And that's what it feels like when there's no resistance, right? When you're on no resistance, it's just in the right goal. It does. It feels like it's just like things will happen where it feels like this was totally magical. Like I could have spent a year and not gotten a result as good as what happened in the last 15 minutes
Yeah.
or whatever that is. So it does. It totally works both ways, like you're saying, Kay. We get that flipped or we get the resistance one way or the other. And as you were describing that, I think you really gave a perfect description of what we were talking about with the stress and the perception of whether it's good or bad.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
listeners, that's what Eleni just described. That is that positive stress. It's the stress of us working on our goals or working on our dreams or doing something we love. And that's where I think you see, even though the more stress we have on those areas, the lower rate of death, even than people with no stress. Because I think that what tells us is it's healthier to be working on a big dream with a lot of stress than sitting on the couch with quote unquote no stress, whatever that theoretical construct of no stress looks like,
I
right?
love that.
But whatever that looks like, it's like that's what I think you gave a really great description of that manifestation that we talked about earlier.
Wow. And I think another part of this for me, like, so it's like, I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, for our listeners and for me, what's kind of like a general rule I can live by of like what dreams I should go after. But I'm guessing, okay, if a dream is like good for yourself and good for the world, you should go for it and try it out. And maybe you start your dreams and then you kind of see if it fits for you or not, like the goal. Like maybe it's like learning as you go. So I guess, yeah, what's the advice to listeners of like, what is a goal you should pursue? What does that look like? And then also, when should you pivot your goal, or when are you self-sabotaging where you should keep pushing, or is this all intuition? Talk me through that.
Yeah, so you've asked some great questions. I think the first thing I would say is just to thy own self be true,
Yes. Amen. Amen.
right? I think the right goal for you, Kay, for you, Eleni, and for me, and for your listeners, they're all going to be different because guess what? We're unique and amazing beings all in our own right. So
Yes.
there was a gentleman named Wallace D. Wattles. He lived in the early 1900s. He was a Methodist minister, and he wrote a book called The Science of Getting Rich. But anyway, there's a chapter in there on gratitude. And
Wait, a Methodist minister got rich. This is amazing. I grew up Methodist. That's hilarious.
okay, he wrote a book called The Science of Getting Rich.
Okay.
And it was on gratitude. Anyway, I lost where I was going with the story, but anyway, there's a great chapter in that book called it's on gratitude. It's like 3-4 pages, but it can be a good thing to read just on kind of the metaphysics of gratitude, kind of as we're getting started.
Yeah.
So you were asking, how do we know what goals to follow
Yes.
and which ones not? Oh,
Yeah.
that's where I was going. So one thing that he wrote in that book that I think really stuck with me is he goes, if you have a dream, you wouldn't have a dream you wouldn't be capable of achieving.
Oh, I love it.
If you look at that from God or from the universe or that higher being, it's like
Yeah.
we may not always succeed or we may have failure, things may come up on our way, but you wouldn't be given a dream you didn't at least have the possibility of being able to achieve.
Cool.
So I think that's I think a cool thing to think about. It's just if you have a dream or you have a vision, go for it, right?
Yeah.
There's some degree of financial planning and time management and
Yeah.
not saying quit your job to go do that, but
Right.
I am saying,
Start pulling threads.
honor your family. Yeah, honor your
Yep.
family, honor the setup you have with your job, but find a way to see what you can do
Yeah.
right now. And
Yeah.
so I think that's the answer on that is just be true to yourself. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's hard because we live in a world where sometimes parents will tell kids the dream they should follow, or your boss will. Or we will be the parent or the boss telling other people what their dream should be. And sometimes it's hard to let someone have the total choice to say, I'm willing to do something and give them the time and space to do that, right? But I think to have that as a gift and as a setup is really powerful. And then your second point is, how do you know when you're bouncing off your dream
Mm-hmm.
or when, hey, it's time to reevaluate with new information?
Mm-hmm.
And that I don't have a magical answer to
Mm.
in terms of like a one-liner there, because it's a different feeling. I think, Elena, you said it was kind of like there's like an intuitiveness you can kind of feel
Yeah.
around it. But sometimes you just, I'd say the way to do it is look at your life.
Mm-hmm.
Like as you move away from that, does it feel like life kind of gets better? Do you see more like happy coincidences showing up in your life? Do you feel more signs that you're on the right track?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, I would say trust that and go that way. Or do you see more signs where it's problem after stop, and you're connecting instead of to the right people at the right time and
Mm-hmm.
having those little bits of magic happen? Is it the day like you're on your way to work, the coffee spills, the baby's sick, you hit 4 red lights on the way, and you're just like, no matter what I do, I just can't get to the office,
Yeah.
right? And kind of looking at those signs, but I think there very much is an intuition around it because sometimes they can have similar manifestations.
Tapping into like our feelings about things is a wild new like grown up approach to me doing my life. I literally was raised all thought, no emotion. So I really have, for as emotional as a person as I am, my decisions have always been very think it out,
Sure.
pros and cons list. So like you have both mentioned many times, like, how does it make you feel? How do you, and I was like, crap, guys, I got to start figuring this out. Like, that's so
Yeah.
good. So I think it is so important for our listeners. Permission to dream, check in how you're feeling, and that's a good thing to do. That's just a wild mind shift for me. But also on the self-sabotaging, how do some people self-sabotage, and how do we kind of work through that?
Well, yeah, that's a great example. I think one is, do we know, do each of us know what the successful actions are in our life? Like if we're going towards a goal, do we know what's helping us get there?
Yeah.
Right? And then do we continue doing it? And I'll give an example. The example that jumps out to me first is because you just said it, Elaine, was yours on gratitude, right? You had the biggest win that I heard around gratitude, that what you perceived and wrote about was exactly what happened. And that was literally the last day you did it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think I mean, that's one example. And there's a story around it, there's piece around it. But just imagine the power and what you were tapping into on that day. And how often do people have the biggest win of their life and then quit or
Yeah.
then retire or then stop doing it?
Yeah. What
Right. So I
is
think
that? Yeah. What
yeah,
the heck?
I think it's charge on the positive. It's difficult having those higher states.
Yes. It's
It is. It
unfamiliar.
does take energy.
It,
Yeah.
it's unfamiliar. It's a new
Yeah.
level of operating. It's a new level of beingness. It takes energy and effort to break out of the box. And then once you break out of
Yes.
the box, then you got to make the box bigger, right?
Yeah.
And like if you just literally think of expanding the box to including those new abilities and those new states and new awareness, and it can be very uncomfortable and very
Yeah.
destabilizing for you and those people around you. So you hear people talk about this was a good month in business or it was a bad month in business. Well, most business owners, in my experience, don't really know what creates a good month and what creates not a good month. And I think a great business is, I know X, Y, and Z is what needs to happen to do that. And then if you want no more clients, you do X, Y, and Z. And if you
Right.
don't, you hold off for a little bit,
Yep.
right? And obviously that's a description of like a level of mastery in business where you can just turn on and off. But we can get causative in those areas. And then if one is, do we know them? And two is, are we willing to do them?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So an example of self-sabotage would be not knowing those actions that are creating success in our life. And a second one would be quitting those successful actions or stopping them or justifying or rationalizing why we're stepping away from those areas.
So
Right. And that
then,
could be in
oh, go ahead.
business or relationship. No, that could be in business or relationship or yeah. But it can go manifest in different ways, but that's kind of the mechanics I've seen.
So then that comes back to like that self-awareness and tapping in. Like,
Sure.
oh, was that, helpful or not? Like, oh, this action, and really being self-aware and present is all coming back to that again.
Well, yeah, like
Yeah, 'cause you
exactly
gotta,
like you shared at the beginning, like taking that time to journal. Okay, what went well today and why did it go well? I think that's exactly what you're getting into now is, if we're not having those times of awareness and presence with ourselves at the end of the day to ask those questions, and we never know why a day went well.
Yeah.
Like you said, you can't repeat it. And that is a form of self-sabotage, because you can have all the tools right at your fingertips and you're just not using them. You're like trying to open the coconut by smacking it with your hand instead of picking up the hammer that's right next to you. And you used the hammer one time and you cracked open the coconut and it was great, but you didn't remember that that's what worked.
Yes.
You should remember that at one point that coconut opened for you, and I don't know why it worked so well that one day, but I'm going to keep smacking it with my head.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it could totally be like that. And that can be like in our relationships, like what are the touch points that help me have a great relationship with my partner or my good friends? It's like, oh, we go to dinner once a month, or we do X or Y or Z once a month, or oh, every time we do this, it's always so much fun. But then people got busy, and for whatever reason, we haven't connected like that in 6 months, right? I mean, how easy is it to even in a non-business have the successful actions in a relationship drop out, or talk to someone once a week, or whatever those are? The more we can define them and then do them, that's the basis of, I think, just to be able to maintain success. But do we understand what those are? And I think that's, again, goes back to inspection, goes back to being clear on what we want. And then do we know every effect has a cause? And do we know what those cause points are? And are we able to, create the time, create the space, create the energy to keep doing them to be able to manifest or create what we want?
Well, I think the topic of self-sabotage is so interesting to me. I've wondered about this for years. It's so funny how like random things we say or hear can impact us for years, or impact other people for years, and you don't even think about it. But I worked for a functional medicine doctor when I was like finishing my nutrition degree. And she came in one day and she said something about how the practice was going really well. So she was sure she was going to self-sabotage herself, because she had just heard a podcast where the guy was talking about how by human nature, we self-sabotage. Like as soon as things start going well for us, we for some reason hit the brakes. We do something that sabotages. And I thought that was such an interesting concept. And I have that line that she said has like stuck in my brain for all these years. It's probably been like 6 years now that I've been thinking about that. And anytime I'm being successful, now I'm cognizant of it. I'm like, am I about to self-sabotage myself? What am I doing that's about to self-sabotage, right? Yeah. I think that's an interesting principle. Do you, like, does that fall in line with what you've heard or understood, or what do you think?
So in my experience, I think there are some common habits, but I think it can very much be like an introspective phenomenon where all of a sudden you're like second guessing your every step based on that idea.
Yeah.
Yep, like
and
a crazy person.
And I can relate to that idea. I think the idea of with success, I think one idea that makes a lot of sense to me and that I found really true is when we have, a big win or we have a big success in our life, we feel more ourselves. Often we feel bigger and feel happier, or feel, more connected, or you feel more present. And I think what happens is in those moments, we empower our positive side, right? We empower our knowledge, our love, our presence. But I think we can also empower the negative side. I think in those moments, we can also empower our fears or our anxieties or our worry as well. And I think, or one manifestation you can see of that is if we look at people who have hit a level of fame, in sports or in music or in acting, there's definitely some things that go with it. Drug abuse, alcohol abuse, relationship issues, right? You can see these like reoccurring patterns. And some of those are quite tragic, where, thinking just of Robin Williams at the moment, just the guy looks like he was the funniest, most amazing person. He walks into a room of comedians and they're looking at him, right? He had that ability to bring so much joy to others. And obviously there was an incredible amount of, darkness that was there for him as well. So I think without understanding those pieces, without understanding, the positive and the anxiety, and having a way to handle those fear or the nervousness or the uncertainty or those things that can turn on, I think it sets us up to be a little bit skittish. But I think there totally is a way to do both well. And I think ultimately our natural state is totally you. big and expanded and loving and knowledgeable and connected. I think that is very much our natural state.
Mm-hmm.
And can we run into some old habit patterns or behaviors or things that are kind of like short circuit kind of tripwires on the way? Yeah. And I think they're kind of unique for each person. Um, but I'd like to, yeah, so I'd like to leave with that idea that I think that is true, and also with the idea that I think our natural state is very much not having those things, but we each have our own kind of mechanisms or pieces there that may show up in our lives, right? And they can be quite different person to person. But I think if you ask, is it a common pattern of people that there's something there? I bet if you ask most people listening to the podcast, they could think of a time where things were going great, and then they could think of a time when something happened after. So I think very much so.
Then it's that courage of that trust muscle after that to just be like, no, I'm just going to keep going. I'm just going to keep going. Yeah. Like turn on a light to get out the darkness, we're just going to keep going. And then maybe it's a just keep swimming Nemo thing. Is that Dory?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it doesn't have to be like a fait accompli that it's going to turn into something horrible, but can we feel and process through that anxiety? Mm-hmm. Or could we feel and process through that fear or the nervousness and work through some of those pieces? So then we can go from this big to expanded, but instead of shrinking back down because we don't feel like we can handle that, can we work through the stuff that gets triggered and then stay stably big and expanded? Yeah. And then this is our new operating basis to operate from next time. Yeah. And you go through that process.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And I am currently in love with Carl Jung psychology. Do you follow his? Mm-hmm. And he believes in God, and he helped with set up the AA model for Alcoholics Anonymous. So I definitely love his way of psychology. And one of the things that is important for him is integrating your shadow self. So we all have this side that isn't necessarily bad, quote unquote bad, but we've pushed it into the shadow because of shame or guilt or blame in society. And so I think also with success in life, there is something to I guess outing your shadow self, whatever was put in there in this negative connotation, well, for me, this is a pretty benign example, but I'm a little extra, I'm a little loud, I'm a little goofy, whatever. And so I've tried to pretend that I'm the smartest person in the room, but it's God, I'm just really not. So I'm just going to own the fact that I'm just very real and can't say words right. And I think there's a power in that, that side of myself I've tried to hide and pretend, but then it's really, that's just who I am. I'm just going to let it out. I can't say words right. I just don't really care. You know what I mean? And there's a power in owning that and not having the shadow, you know what I mean? Sure. Make your life dark a little bit. So I don't know how that plays in at all to this, except that is something that has made me feel at peace with kind of that bad, quote unquote, bad side of ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think that can be incredibly inspiring. Because there's a lot of people who can relate to that.
Yeah.
And even if they can relate to that directly because they have those similar feelings of extra and not being smart enough or mispronouncing words, whether it's that directly or just they're inspired by the honesty.
Yeah.
And inspired by hey, I've got some things that are easier not to talk about, but just to do that. I think that is an incredible, positive to put out in the world and let people connect to, because I think it is very inspiring to see people, have that honesty and truth around it. And I think maybe how that connects to kind of what we're talking about is, I've heard it said there's a left foot and a right foot. It's not a wrong foot and a right foot, right? There's a natural duality to the universe, man, woman, light, dark.
Yeah.
Right. And you can see night, day, right? We can see that. And if we have a view of the world that only looks at, maybe the positive side, then we're kind of putting on blinders and not looking at those times where maybe we're upset, or maybe when we hurt someone, or maybe when we were hurt, right? But if we can look at those and process through that, work through that, be honest, apologize, ask for forgiveness, right? Wherever those things are, then it's very much you're present with the whole thing and not immediately slicing it down to half of the view, as an example.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love that we brought in that part, because I do feel in success magazine or whatever. It's all like about
Yeah.
the light side and the success and the flashiness. And I think to really bring in the no, in the successful world, there is the duality. Like there is the good and the bad, or there's the light and the darkness, and to be able to still live in love and move forward, holding both of those is just kind of life. Just what it is.
And one of the things I heard is that's one of the biggest, talk about The Secret, the movie, or manifesting what you want, or focus on the positive and you'll get it. I think there's a lot of value in that. But the liability of it is if you don't understand that you're also can trigger the negative, or that there is a duality to it, then you're not being fully present, fully truthful with that. We're just realizing, hey, you can put the positive there, but if you talk to someone about health, what's it going to trigger for them? Well, maybe the time they weren't healthy, or the areas they're not healthy, or what they don't have. You talk to someone about a great relationship, it may trigger what they feel like they don't have in that area, right? So the positive, the more we talk about it, can trigger the negative. So again, if we can include all that, it's a different place to begin on than if we ignore all of that, because it's like being half present versus including all of it.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, I remember when we were going through our infertility journey, my husband and I was praying one time, and I was just looking to see if I could find exactly what came to me, and I couldn't find the exact thing. But, what came to me is essentially there is no spring without winter. There is no light without dark. There is no joy without sadness. And I think we want only the positive, but we don't know and can't experience the positive if we don't also experience the negative.
Yeah.
And if we just let ourselves feel fully each of those things, then when you move out of it, the experience is so deep. That's why I love living in Iowa. I mean, I grew up in California. There's no seasons. I had no joy with the seasons. I did not know what it was to really
Wait, I'm like, you were just always happy, Elaine.
No, but you're not, because it's just status quo, right? It's what you're used to. And now you go through a winter and suddenly spring is the most magical time of the year. And you don't know what that's like when it's only summer. So all of that to say, I think you have to have both. You have to really allow yourself to feel both, because you really can't experience what it is to be really happy if you don't know what it is to be really sad.
Fair. That's fair. And the more you work and put in the hardship and go through something hard or sad, the more beautiful and rewarding things are. So you're so right. Gosh, life is so sad and hard and great and wonderful and all of it. Oh my God.
And sometimes great and hard and wonderful because it is sad, right? Just to kind of connect all of that there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't even know what to title this podcast, because I feel like this was like a dissection
existential,
of life.
The
dissection of life.
We've cured the world's problems with Dr. Jeff Crippen.
But let's just give a few takeaways, if you would, Dr. Jeff, what are a few takeaways our listeners could do, simple things they could do today to just start walking on this process of setting goals and winning?
I think this is the most, considering what we've talked about over the last hour plus, I could literally go in any one of them, approximately a million different directions.
Right.
We've talked about it in this last bit. I'll tell you one, just real concrete that we talked about is, I think, having a gratitude practice, just plugging yourself into the positive, whether that's with some of the questions I shared early in the episode, whether you have your own practice. Some people will write it down. Some people will do it through prayer. Some people will do it through a meditation. I think, I'm not particularly fixed on the best way for you to do it, but just having some way to plug into that positive, I think would be incredibly effective and valuable. And then I think maybe just reflecting on that last idea of what are the successful actions in the area? So what is one area that you want to work on this year? We're recording this in early February, so this will probably come out, the next few weeks. In March, so the beginning. So we're in about a quarter point of the year. So it's, what are those goals that you made a couple months ago now? And then maybe looking at those and what are those successful actions that you're going to take in the area?
Yeah.
And then do you know what they are? Like if you want to lose weight or create better health or create a better relationship or sleep better, can you test and measure some of those successful actions and maybe you write it down? So you make sure you're looking at those because I'll tell you, it's the darndest thing. They're the easiest things to forget. The most successful things are the easiest things to drop out or stop doing or find something else there. But if you have a way to write it down and force yourself to reconnect to it, um, that'll put you way, way ahead of the game on being able to achieve whatever that goal or want you have in that area.
I love it. Well, I think it's, and I'll just add one thing to the gratitude practice. When I had my journaling, which I'm wanting to get back to now, I can feel it in my heart. But I wrote down every day something different. So I never expressed gratitude for the same thing twice. I would have a variation on it. And I think that's really powerful because it forces you to dig deep, and really look. And sometimes I wrote things as simple as, I'm thankful for the sunshine today. Because it's, you're looking for other things, but it does make you reflect on your world, your whole world with gratitude. And then because you can run out of positive experiences to be grateful for, you start learning to be grateful for the negative, quote unquote, negative experiences and what they're teaching you.
Yes.
And so then it gives you that opportunity of I already talked about this thing, that thing, and that thing. I'm going to find a way to be grateful for this difficult situation I'm going through because I haven't talked about that.
Oh, that's full maturity right there. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I've never made a rule around that, but I've always felt like, again, I'm maybe 15 years in, there's always like a certain joy I feel when I think of something I've never been grateful for. Like the road stripers, whoever stripes the road and puts the little lines down so we can drive on. Just some of the stuff, like whoever invented the buttons on thermostats, right? Just sometimes it's like the most random things. There's always it fills me with like a little bit of extra joy inside to think of something new. Sometimes I'm often doing it first thing in the morning. So things like pillows or the sunshine or like a good night's sleep. Some of that stuff is like very top of mind when I do it. But there is a joy, I very much can relate to that, of finding something new that I haven't thought about it or appreciated or recognized before.
And in our connected universe, that road striper somewhere is waking up feeling really joyful.
I love it.
He's like, I don't know why, but
somewhere that's like 5% happier now.
Because he just said it. He was like, this is a good day. I don't know why, but it's a good day. I love it.
Have so many painted roads. The road's going to be extra colorful. Because of this.
Well, I love it. I love it.
That was amazing. I feel like I need to go home and process everything that you've poured into our souls today. I won't fit through the door. I'm so expanded. We'll see.
Awesome.
Gosh, well, I'm so glad to have met you today, Dr. Jeff, and this is incredible. And you are a wise, wise, wise man, and keep spreading your wisdom to everyone. And we want you on the podcast anytime we can have you, and we could just keep talking about existentialism forever. Let's just do that.
I think we could interview you every podcast for the rest of eternity, and we wouldn't run out of things to say.
Yes. The world is abundant, right there, right there. Well,
awesome.
Well,
appreciate
thank you.
Been on there. Great. Like I said, great to be back, Eleni. Great to meet you, Kay, and get to do this kind of Zoom in person. And it was a fantastic conversation. Thank you guys for your contributions to it, because I think it was kind of a fun co-creation. I hope it's super valuable to the list. I hope they have 8% as much fun as we did doing it.
Yes.
So that'll be a tremendous win for all of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If make it a drinking game, take a drink every time we say feelings. They're gonna have a good time too.
Have your shot of your favorite mineral water.
Yes, that's right.
You will be wonderful.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jeff, and
pleasure
to our listeners. Go be renegades.
Go be expanded renegades.
Oh, I like that.
Go be renegades.
Thank you for listening to the Renegade Nutrition Podcast.
Please keep in mind that this podcast is an educational service that provides general health information. The content on this podcast is not a substitute for direct, personal, professional medical care and diagnosis. You should always talk to your doctor before making a dietary or lifestyle change. Go be renegades!
Go be renegades!